Conversations with Consequences, where we aim to change and improve the culture one conversation at a time. You can listen to Conversations with Consequences on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network, Saturday mornings at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, or catch the encore at 5 p.m. We're also on Sirius XM Channel 130. Of course, our radio show is always a podcast. Go to thecatholicassociation.org/podcasts or directly to wherever you listen to your podcasts. Conversations with Consequences is the radio show of the Catholic Association. Again, at thecatholicassociation.org, you can read more about our work defending religious liberty and the church in the public square and in the media, wherever we can be helpful. You can sign up to our daily clips, which will send to your inbox the important news of the day, short, and that's an easy sign up on our website. Today we have a great show lined up for you, as we try to do every week. Last weekend at Dodgers Stadium, you may have heard, although I'm surprised a lot of people have not heard, because I spoke to people over the weekend who are Catholics and Christians, but they were not aware of what's going on. In Dodger Stadium, the corporation that runs the Dodgers decided to honor an anti-Catholic hate group called the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. They're basically drag queens or transvestite men who dress up as nuns in a very aggressive and demeaning way, and then they do ugly things that are very offensive to us Catholics, and they should be to all Christians or anybody of any religious understanding, or even anybody with a decent mind. But first, we mark this month 1 year since the fall of Roe v. Wade with the Dobbs decision, and we've asked our dear friend Kathryn Jean Lopez of National Review to talk to us about this anniversary and about a beautiful piece that she wrote in the National Catholic Register about how to respond with love in the face of all the difficulties that have ensued since then. Welcome to the show, Kathryn.
Thank you, Gracie.
You wrote a piece for the National Catholic Register that came out on the 19th, June 19th, because our listeners are going to want to look it up. It's called What Our Post-Roe World Needs to See Love. It's a very beautiful piece. It's long and reflective, Kathryn, and you make some very important points that I think are very well taken, because in this 1 year since Dobbs told the end of Roe, it was such an exciting moment, but it's been a really hard year. I think a lot of people who are in the pro-life movement are just happy pro-life warriors in their small way or big way. They found it difficult. Has that been your experience too?
Yeah, and I remember the morning that it happened last year. It was the Feast of the Sacred Heart, and I was at the Given Institute in Philadelphia, this gathering for young Catholic women. And they're supposed to stay off their phones. So theoretically, they didn't know it happened. And so I announced it to them. And one of the first things I said to them, of course, it was wonderful to be in a room with 200 women, if you count the mentors and the young women who applauded. And that's not what you would, the impression you got in the media, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
But very quick to say, do not pop champagne corks. This actually isn't a time for celebration. Yes, thanks be to God, the Supreme Court undid this injustice. But there's so much work to do. And that's some of what you've seen play out over the last year. But I do think, as you intimated, I think pro-life people are down. I think a lot of people thought, this might be the end of abortion in America. No. Now, lives have been saved in states where there have been protections for some of the unborn, a lot of the unborn, most of the unborn, but miles to go. And one of the realities is that abortion is more hidden than ever. When you have Walgreens and CVS, dispensing abortion pills now, I I'm pretty sure that most Americans didn't even know there was such a thing, as abortion by pill. And that's the most of the abortions in America today. And so I think one of the most important things for pro-lifers to do is not be overwhelmed, increase your prayer, but ask yourself some questions and these are questions I ask myself all the time. Do the young people in your life know that they can come to you when they find themselves in an unplanned pregnancy situation? Because I often fear that if you're known as a practicing Catholic or a pro-lifer or a Republican or, any of these things, you're the last person that someone could come to, because they know you have views and they fear that they would be judged. And, pro-life people should be the first people that young people know that they can go to, because we should be inundating people with love, even as we tell the truth about the dignity of human life.
Yeah, so we don't want to be the people that others fear,
Right.
for being judgmental or for being scandalized, right? But
Right.
and I know that happens, but that's not my experience of pro-life people. And you point that out in your pretty piece, that pro-life people are the ones who go to the pregnancy care centers and show up and do the work, right? And also meet. So often we meet people and travel with them and accompany them in non-judgmental ways, but obviously with a lot of love and how can I help you and how can I be that person for you that will hold your hand through whatever happens, right? But you're right. Many, because of the way we're painted in the media, I think more than anything else, people might tend to think of us as judgmental. But again, that's not my experience of pro-lifers. And I'm sure it's not yours either.
Yeah, no, that's definitely not the impression you get in the media. But I also think that we need to be extra careful. It can, on social media, in our conversations with people, sometimes when I talk about, there's a story I tell about being outside of Planned Parenthood one day, in New York City, and encountering a 17-year-old Black girl who had taken the first abortion pill. And another sidewalk counselor was talking to her, trying to get her to submit to the abortion pill reversal. And this sidewalk counselor, I kind of was guilty of sidewalk counseling malpractice, because you're not supposed to interrupt when a sidewalk counselor is talking to somebody. But I felt so bad for this girl. The sidewalk counselor was saying, you're going to see your baby in the toilet and flush your baby. Yeah. And so then I went up and I said, I'm kind of trying to be a little softer, and hi, what's your name? And I talked to her about the Sisters of Life, who are not far away from that particular clinic. So I thought maybe we can get her there and have some cookies and tea and, see what the situation is. But she couldn't do that. She was very interested. The point I went over was when she said, I don't even support abortion. And she said, you're making me feel worse. And so anyway, long story short, she couldn't go to the Sisters of Life because she had to pick up her little brother. She said her mother was making her get the abortion. Her boyfriend didn't know. Her boyfriend would love to be a dad, etc. She does connect with two Sisters of Life, but as they're making plans to meet with a doctor, her mom takes the phone away. So fast forward, so she winds up going through with the abortion. But fast forward some months, she is at Planned Parenthood again. She's pregnant again, but it's later in the pregnancy. And she has to have a surgical abortion. And by the grace of God, whoever is talking to her, describing what's going to happen, says, and then we stop the heartbeat. Well, that was the end of it. She left. She was not going to be having anything to do with stopping a heartbeat. Well, sometimes when I tell that story to conservatives, they say immediately, well, why couldn't she keep her legs together? And this is what I mean. Like, young people are so inundated with sex is what you do on your phone, on your computer. Like, the Rihanna song that she sang while pregnant at the Super Bowl halftime show this year, Rude Boy, is all about using him before he uses you. That is the culture. And so, like, that concept is just like so foreign. And so we do, and I'm not saying that's every conservative, I'm not saying that's every, but I've heard it often enough that I know it is a problem.
Kathryn, I've talked about this on the show, and I've written about it. One of the things that I do in my as a side gig is I do a lot of talk on with young people. I give them talks on chastity, on even puberty, anything that has to do. They call me the sex lady in our parish and in the archdiocese. And I go around to schools and I talk to young people, sometimes in small groups, sometimes big groups. And one of the things that shocks me over and over again is even young people who are in a Catholic environment, they can't imagine dating or just being a young adult or a late teen without being sexually active, because the idea doesn't exist in their heads. It's never been presented to them. They don't know anyone who's behaved in a chaste way until marriage. If they do know that person hasn't shared that with them. And it's been, that idea is just a ridiculous idea. It's like if I spoke to you about flying, without wings, or I can jump from the roof and fly. They say, no, of course you can't. That's just impossible, right?
Or even simpler, like not drinking water.
Exactly.
Not having sex is like not drinking water.
Exactly. And God knows this about the people, the young people who have grown up since Roe v. Wade, and I wanted to talk that over with you. One of the things that's depressing me about a year past after Dobbs and the end of Roe is that we had so many decades of legal abortion in which our minds marinated in this idea that sex is for pleasure, because now it's without the consequence of pregnancy because of contraception. And then if the pregnancy fails, you can always have an abortion through 40 weeks of pregnancy. I mean, really, there's no way that in the United States for all those decades, you would be saddled with a baby if that's not what you wanted, right?
Right.
And I don't even mean that you would give birth and give it up for adoption, which is a wonderful, beautiful thing and painful for the mom, of course. But you could just destroy that life. And we were just creating this culture where pregnancy is an unthinkable thing that is only thinkable when you choose it and when it's exactly the right time with the right person, and you're going to choose that act, right? You're going to say, well, there's pregnancy, that's what I'm going to choose because I want a baby this year, this kind of baby, because people even abort because it's the wrong sex, and then sex as an act of pleasure that fulfills you in every way and makes you human. And without it, you're inhuman in some way. It's horrible to think of this, that we go back, we say, okay, no, so there's no more Roe, and then we're going to sort of juggle all these things at the state level. But the culture is so sick. How many decades will it take, if ever, to go back to the idea that sex is for procreation and that you have to approach it responsibly and within marriage so that the baby can be received. And yes, sometimes mistakes happen, but abortion is not a fail-safe. It's the end of a life.
Well, in the coming days, the Biden administration is having a series of abortion events where they talk about how much women need abortion. And I think one of the things that we need to do is give a voice to so many women who have been hurt by abortion.
And men, right?
And men, yes, and men. But I think even the concept of hearing from a woman is so foreign to people, about the pain that it's caused and the regret that it's caused. And, something that you mentioned earlier, Gracie, that idea that a young person has no idea that there are adults in their life who, wait until marriage and have a view of sex that's more than instant gratification. Obviously you have these conversations when appropriate, but the witness of joyful couples who are living chastely is really important. And even the word chastity, right? Like everybody's called to chastity, but when you say that, people think you're talking about celibacy.
It's my children hate that word because for years I've been doing something called Chastity Day at the Archdiocese of Miami. And it's for 8th graders. It's a fabulous program. They call it Chastity Day. I think last year they finally changed the name. But for years, my children had to go to it as they were in their 8th grade parochial schools and private and Catholic schools. But they hated the name because it made them so embarrassed that their mom was talking about chastity in front of their entire school population at their schools. And you're right, the word chastity is completely misunderstood. And it just means living sex responsibly and in charity and with love and knowing that it creates children and the things that children need are a married mother and father.
Which is not a given these days. I mean, on Father's Day, there were a number of profiles of gay men in gay marriages who had multiple children by different surrogates. And it was a reminder of how far we've come. And I mean, one thing that I think is important to appreciate rather than get overwhelmed and depressed by all of this is that Paul VI was right in Humanae Vitae.
Yes, exactly.
And prophetic. And if we go back, I think it gives us an appreciation for the church obviously has some credibility problems in the world today, for some good reasons and for some not. But the truth is in the church, and to have some confidence about that and to trust that through our witnesses of virtue in small and big ways, I do think that's where the renewal happens. I'm on the board of a ministry called Witness to Love, and they do marriage mentoring. And it's this really cool approach where, like, if you're in a parish and you're getting ready to get married, instead of going through the typical pre-Cana afternoon or whatever box checking in some dioceses, it's not very impressive. You find a couple in your parish who, like, you want what they have. And so you kind of approach them, and they're usually surprised, shocked, probably.
I like that it's coming from the younger couple. They approach the older couple. I think that's very nice.
Exactly, and so both couples benefit from it. And there's a training involved and whatnot. But the point is that there is a witness there on both couples' parts, and there's an accompaniment, which gets back to what we were talking about earlier about. Pro-life movement at its best is accompanying. And that's something that we need to show more. I was speaking to Columbia University students, like the Columbia Pro-Life Club a couple of weeks ago. And I asked, so, like, what's the closest pregnancy care center? And nobody knew in the Pro-Life Club. And I think that's a typical thing. So just doing simple things like making sure you're supporting your local crisis pregnancy center, or that you even know what it is, where it is,
and what it offers, and how to direct someone there. We should all have that phone number on speed dial, right? There's no speed dials anymore. I'm talking about our favorites. On our favorites. But we should have that. We should have that information. You know what's nice too?
Even little brochures and things.
Little brochures. What's really helpful if you make a little card out of with your own resources, and then you give it to you put it in the confessionals with the priest's permission, of course, at your parish, and say, Father, could we have these little cards in the confessional in case?
I try to make sure that the parishes I frequent have post-abortion healing brochures from the Sisters of Life. I try to keep those kind of things in my purse too, just in case. You never know.
There's information and an accompaniment out there, and we don't know how to direct them. We don't pay attention and have that information on us. And as you say, we should be volunteering at the centers and being present and looking out for that girl in our parish who looks troubled. God brings us people to our path. He puts people in our path that we can help, but we have to be attentive.
And every day, most of us are encountering post-abortive women. I'm sure you have post-abortive women listening right now. And men.
They're in our families. They're in the pews.
Right,
They're
right.
at the grocery store. They're the mothers of the children in our classes. They're everywhere.
And so to know that, to have that in your heart and mind, and it should direct the way we talk about these issues too. Whenever we talk about abortion, about in politics or the news, bear in mind that somebody who's listening to us may have had an abortion, may be pondering an abortion, and make sure you're saying what you're saying with love, about the truth, obviously.
I think I know that many people who work in the pro-life movement at the pregnancy care center level, especially, who are engaged and in Project Rachel and things like that, or Rachel's Vineyard, they are post-abortive. They were so traumatized by their experience. They're so persistently sad about it. They've had so much trouble climbing out of that hole, entrusting themselves to God's mercy, which seems, to a post-abortive person, woman or man, sometimes the idea that God could forgive that is incomprehensible, because they can't find forgiveness for themselves inside their own hearts, right? So they don't realize that God's heart is so much bigger.
I often think about the fact that Dorothy Day, who Archbishop Gomez once said, isn't a saint yet, but makes me want to be one.
That's pretty.
Was a beautiful line. Yeah. She, in her final years, still was writing about her abortion. And she knew she had been forgiven. She had gone to confession after she had her conversion. But it's something you don't forget, because it's a human life, And once you realize that, and even if you haven't come to the full realization of that, I mean, your body knows. And you know better than I all of the physiological changes that come with conceiving a child in your womb, and the changes that never can be fully undone.
I find in my own experience, I have found that many women and men realize the enormity of their abortion when they receive their first child into the world, and then they're able to hold the child and say, "Oh, this was the miracle I rejected. This is the life that I'd never held because I said no, or I was coerced into it, or talked into it, or my mom took my phone, or whatever horrible situation that brought them there." But then their life comes crashing to a halt because the enormity of it comes through. And all of us on the pro-life, everyone that I know on the pro-life side, even though we get caught up in the politics and the rhetoric, which can get heated, what we want is not just to save those lives, because those little lives are in God's hands, and he knows how to take care of them, right? The little lives that they made it almost to the threshold and then were taken away. But all those mothers and fathers, the grandmothers, the friend who helped and now regrets it, all those people that were hurt by abortion, we ache for them. Their pain is our pain, because it's such a tragedy, and it removes people from the understanding that God can love them, and to be removed from that is just a desolation.
And you mentioned how so many of the women on the front lines of post-abortion healing and other pro-life work had abortions themselves. Likewise, some of the most ardent advocates of abortion do that because they themselves had abortions. Mm-hmm. And it can either lead to sadness or it can lead to a hardening.
Because it's a kind of defiance, right? Because you say, if I once step a foot down the road to say that it was wrong, then I'm going to crash into a ball of guilt, right? So they do everything they can to deny the reality, because then guilt is on the other side of that, and guilt is a horrible feeling.
Which is another reason that we need to have compassion when we're debating people, discussing this issue, because that's what's underneath, and it's right just below the surface. Sometimes it's on the sleeve. It's very obvious in many cases why people are shouting their abortions.
I've told this story before, Kathryn, but my sister, when she was in college, had her roommate. My sister was we were very pro-life, but but in a very reflexive, sort of ignorant way. This is a long time ago. And her college roommate twice had my sister drive her to get an abortion. And how many years is that ago? 35 years ago. For 35 years, my sister's been agonizing over this. So even people like that, young people who were ancillary, right? Or just caught up in something, suffer.
Trying to be a good friend, right?
Trying to be a good friend. And only realizing later that they had participated in two terrible things, two terrible acts.
Yeah, there's so many layers to the pain.
Yeah.
And so many ways that people suffer from abortion. It's not just the death of the child.
So Kathryn Jean Lopez, thank you so much for joining us. And let me repeat, your beautiful piece is in the National Catholic Register called "What Our Post-Roe World Needs is to See Love." So pretty. I really recommend it to all our listeners. And it's full of wonderful ideas about how to be that loving person on the front lines.
Be creative about love. I think that's the most important thing.
Yes, be creative. Be attentive and creative and thoughtful and hold on tight. This too shall pass, and we will be the witnesses that God wants us to be. Like you, Kathryn.
Like you, Gracie.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Conversations with Consequences. I'm your radio hostess, Dr. Gracie Christie. Welcome to the show, Nathan.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Last weekend, we were treated to a strange sight. The Dodgers honored the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence an hour before their big baseball game, which, by the way, they lost in a complete rout. But right before the game, an hour before, they honored this terrible anti-Catholic hate group of transvestites who make terrible fun of the cross and all the things that we hold most dear in indecent ways and in ways that are very sacrilegious. They honored them as part of their Pride event, and they did it in a hangdog sort of way. They did it when nobody was watching, an hour before the game. Outside, there were thousands of people, thousands of Christians and Catholics and allies praying, quietly protesting this. So before this all happened, the week before, you wrote a really great piece in Real Clear Religion called Perpetual Indulgence versus Religious Conviction. And what I really liked about your piece is that you framed the issue in a religious liberty setting. So I thought you could tell us how this decision by the Dodgers can be best understood as a religious freedom issue.
Sure. It's one of those classic on the one hand and the other hand. On the one hand, it's not a matter of religious liberty in so much as it's not a matter of state coercion. So the state wasn't forcing the Dodgers to do this. The state wasn't taking action against Catholics or others. But on the other hand, it is a matter of religious liberty in so much as the vision of the founders was always that religion be in the public square, that in fact religion is fundamental, is essential to a virtuous society, that religious people and their organizations are at the heart of American life, both publicly and privately. And here was a situation in which you had a professional sports team, the Los Angeles Dodgers, that made this decision to honor and give its Community Heroes Award to the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, as they call themselves, and thereby participate in a much broader effort that has been building and building and building over the years to cast aside religious people and organizations that affirm what is true about what it means to be human, about life and marriage and family and human sexuality and the beautiful complementarity between males and females. And even though the Dodgers have been made very aware of the history of this group, of its history of just the most disrespectful and insidious and grotesque activities that they had perpetuated over the years, they decided to go ahead and honor them. So really making it harder and harder for Catholics and other religious people to fully exercise their faith in the public square.
So it's a religious liberty issue because it makes the public square a place where Catholics don't feel welcome. And in a way that the United States has had over its long history, this a beautiful pluralistic ideal, right? So the religious liberty issue is that the United States is a pluralistic place where people can bring their religious ideas and values and fervor into the public square and be respected there, regardless of what their religion might be. I really like the way you phrase that, because I think most people do stop at that first way of thinking about it that you mentioned first, which is that, well, nobody's coercing the Dodgers into having an anti-Catholic hate group on their field and honoring them. But still, you're creating an ugly environment for religion in general in a land that is beautifully pluralistic, as is the United States.
And I mean, and there's always a distinction between different kinds of coercion or different kinds of pressure. So, there's no evidence that any government entity, any government official was, trying to compel the Dodgers to give this award, to give this honor to this group. But what is certainly true is that those people who and organizations that are promoting the ideology that underpins groups like the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, they are putting pressure on professional sports teams and media outlets and entertainment companies and schools, all starting at preschool all the way up through college and university, to promote and affirm these claims, these false claims about being human, and at the same time to punish, to mock, to belittle those people who affirm really classic understandings of what it means to be human.
I guess you can also think of coercion in the sense that they coerced all their fans and their season ticket holders, the players themselves, the managers, anybody who's in the stands and works at the LA Dodgers, and that's how they make their living. Those people were coerced into participating on some level, right? Depending on what their participation is with the LA Dodgers.
That's exactly right. There's a knock-on effect. So you'll have outside groups that will put pressure on organizations like the Dodgers. The Dodgers then make a decision to hold, for example, a Pride Night, and then in the context of that, to give an award to a group like this. And then, you're taking, you had already decided, months and months and months ago to take your children to the ballpark, and suddenly, this is what you see in front of you. And as you noted, you're a player, and you're now in a position where, you're being often asked across a range of sports to wear apparel with some sort of, sexual orientation and gender identity symbol on it, usually the rainbow flag. If you wear it, in effect, you are affirming the claims of this ideology. And then if you don't, of course, you open yourself up to attack and retribution. So that's exactly right. There's sort of a knock-on effect. There's pressure on the team. The team then puts fans and players in these positions that they just really never should be put in.
And you talk about one player, Trevor Williams, who was very brave, a Catholic baseball player, and he was very brave and came out against this event. And I think that's very brave, especially for a young person. He's very young, relatively young, and they've been living for a long time. Many young people have entirely grown up in an ambiance in an environment where you can't, where the idea of speaking out against whatever flies under the rainbow umbrella, the rainbow flag, they know is a very dangerous thing. They know this, and they know it in their bones. So how does someone like Trevor Williams find the courage to speak out so publicly against this?
So Trevor is somebody that I've gotten to know over the past year. We met on a retreat last fall, and what's always just really impressed me about him is his faith, his commitment to God, his intelligence. All of that came shining through in his response to the Dodgers. Interesting reading his statement where he noted, among other things, that the Dodgers seem to be violating their own code of conduct regarding what fans can or cannot display or wear at games. That is, things that are evidently mocking of other groups, and including religious groups. It's a violation of the Dodgers code of conduct, and so he noted that in his statement. But I think ultimately for him, it just came down to his love of God and love of neighbor, and I think for Trevor, God will not be mocked. And this group that the Dodgers were honoring, they exist to mock God and to mock people who give honor to God, particularly Catholics and other Christians. And I think also he wanted to be a witness and to encourage his fellow players to do likewise. Again, in a winsome, charitable, intelligent way, but one that was very, very clear.
I was very happy that Trevor Williams did this and that he's a Catholic, because sometimes I fear, I'm a Catholic myself, sometimes I fear that Catholics don't shine compared to other people of religious conviction in their ability and their willingness to stand up and say, no, this is offensive, this doesn't belong in the public square. I'm thinking of Muslim players, Muslim parents that have been very, very forthright about saying, no, this rainbow flag is not something that we can stand under or behind or wear on our clothes, because it's proposing something that we know is wrong in the sight of God. So do you think Catholics, do you feel the same way about Trevor Williams, that it's good that he's a Catholic and he did this?
I think so. I mean, and I think a lot of this is rooted in the experience of Catholics in America.
Yes, I agree.
Largely, not exclusively, but largely immigrant at certain stages of our history, and received badly in some cases. Certainly persecuted. Like Irish may not apply. We're all familiar with those scenes. Obviously, even before there was a United States, it was illegal to be a Catholic here, kind of because it was illegal to be Catholic in Britain. And I think over the years, particularly in the 20th century, a number of Catholics, we're tired of being seen as strange and odd, and so let's just be indistinguishable from everybody else. Mm-hmm. And when you crave that kind of acceptance and being indistinguishable, well, then what you look at, what you say and think and do becomes indistinguishable from everybody else. Being accepted and becomes more important than being faithful. And it leads in some cases to a reticence about witnessing in the public square. Now how you do that and when you witness, all of these questions are matters of prudential judgment. Sometimes somebody may choose to do something behind the scenes and be very active behind the scenes and not necessarily do it quite as publicly. But I think to some extent that history of Catholics in the United States has led, and that desire for just complete assimilation rather than just integration has led a lot of Catholics to just sort of hide and not be more forthright in defending the faith in the public square.
I have another question for you, Nathan, that I've asked many people, and I wonder what your take on this is. How is it that corporations like the corporation that runs the LA Dodgers, how do they come to these decisions that I think, a pretty smart adolescent could have foreseen that were going to be pretty contentious and might set off a firestorm? How is it that these things are happening? Because we're seeing them everywhere, right? Of course, I don't have to mention the Bud Light and the Kohl's and who else, Target. How are they getting caught up in this in ways that are so damaging to their brand?
I think to some extent it reflects what's happening internally in a lot of these companies, which then radiates outward, that perhaps they see the culture moving in a certain direction and want to be on the cutting edge of it. Companies historically have been seen as being kind of stodgy and obstructionist to social change, and maybe they see this as an opportunity to be forward looking and leaning when it comes to culture. I think for some, in some cases you may have staff that are owners or others who actually, believe some of these ideological claims. There's a fear, to some extent, a fear of being attacked as being, hateful or bigoted or something along those lines from not holding these kind of events. So I think these are all factors. I think what they're missing is that there's a cross section of Americans, and you hinted at this earlier. It's not just Christians, whether they're Catholic or other. It's Muslims as well. My own colleague, Ismail Royer, has been very involved in working closely with parents in a county in Maryland, Montgomery County, Maryland, who are pursuing legal action against county education officials who have made it impossible for parents to opt out of this content in their schools that's highly sexual, that's pushing children to read books at a very early age, I think starting as early as the age of 5, talking about going from being a man to a woman or vice versa. And, for a long time, parents could say, thanks, but no thanks. We don't want our children seeing that and reading that. And then the county decided, nope, you must. We're going to force your children to read it. And so they responded. So it's not just, there's a cross-section of people across religious traditions that are pushing back on it, which I think is a really exciting development in America.
And I see the boycotts that have tumbled the sales of Target and Bud Light, for instance, and also the demonstration that took place in front of Dodger Stadium at the same time that the horrible transvestites were inside receiving their prize. And that demonstration was thousands of people on a Friday afternoon, I think it was a Friday, and who I'm sure had better places to be. But they were there. They made their appearance and they took the time. And I'm feeling I'm feeling more hopeful that Americans are ready to take the country back, in a sense, to a time where you could be at a game or at school or at the shops without having a certain sexual ideology enforced on you.
That's right. And I mean, it's interesting. You think about the name of this group that the Dodgers were honoring, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. Indulgence in what? Indulgence in our worst desires, indulgence in using other people for kind of sexual gratification, indulgence in selfishness. And these Americans, whether they're the ones who were praying or demonstrating or others, are pointing to a different way of living, a way of selflessness, of self-sacrifice, of love of neighbor. And that was one of the things that I highlighted in the piece, is that, I have the great privilege of having very close friends, very dear friends who are religious sisters who kind of exemplify this, really beautiful, luminous, selfless way of living. And so, whether it's these parents in Maryland or people who were, really concerned about what the Dodgers were doing, they're pointing to a different way of living, a way of living that's quite a contrast from what groups like the Dodgers are honoring have been promoting for a number of decades now.
Well, let's hope, Nathaniel Hurd, that the wave keeps growing and that more and more people start living that out in their daily lives and in the way they go into the public square with their values and ideals, and they don't have to leave them at the door. So thank you for joining us, and to our listeners, please check out Nathaniel Hurd of the Religious Freedom Institute on Real Clear Religion, his piece Perpetual Indulgence versus Religious Conviction. I think you'll really like it. Thank you, Nathaniel.
Thanks so much.
Every morning, the Catholic Association reviews all the latest news and sends our subscribers a carefully curated collection of the most important news of the day. Items are specifically selected for a smart Catholic audience like you. Don't let the world take you by surprise. Subscribe to our daily media roundup at thecatholicassociation.org. And now, Father Roger Landry offers us, as is customary, a short and inspiring homily to prepare us for this Sunday's Gospel.
This is Father Roger Landry, and it's a joy for me to be with you as we enter into the consequential conversation the risen Lord Jesus wants to have with each of us this Sunday, when Jesus will say to us something very consoling on the one hand and very disconcerting at the same time on the other, before teaching us how the two go together. Jesus first tells us, "Fear no one," It goes on to give us the reason not to be afraid, because our Father in heaven loves us more than all the sparrows in the world and knows us intimately down to the last strand of hair. 15 times in the gospel, in fact, Jesus tells us not to be afraid. Regularly gives us as the reason because our Father in heaven will provide for us and protect us. In the Sermon on the Mount, for example, he tells us not to worry about what we will eat or drink or wear, things we really need, because that same Father who clothes the lilies of the field knows what we need and will take care of us. In this Sunday's gospel, Jesus tells us that he doesn't even want us to fear suffering or physical death, because not even death can separate us from the Father's love. These words are even more important at a time in which so many are eaten alive by anxiety, insecurity, and fear due to problems in their personal or family life, their studies, their career, or because of the state of the world, various worrisome trends in culture, law, and politics, and a litany of other concerns. At the same time that Jesus tells us fear no one, he adds that there is one we should have fear of. Do not fear, he says, those who can kill the body but can't kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both body and soul in hell. Who is this who can destroy us in Gehenna? Saints and biblical scholars have answered this question 2 ways. The majority have said that it refers to God who created us, who will judge us, and who has the ability to send us to eternal self-alienation in hell for having chosen against him in this life. By this interpretation, Jesus is saying, fear God rather than men. Then it goes on in the gospel to help us to learn how to relate to God, not fundamentally out of a servile fear, but out of filial love. Since this God whom we should fear is one who, Jesus says, protects sparrows, has numbered every follicle, and will embrace with love and gratitude everyone who acknowledges Jesus. The second minority interpretation is that the one who can destroy both body and soul in hell is the devil. Of course, the devil's not divine and certainly cannot destroy in the same way God would be able to destroy, but he can torment both body and soul forever. Even though I'm personally inclined toward the first interpretation, that Jesus is telling us not to be afraid even of those who threaten to murder us, but rather to focus on the God who loves us and in correspondence to the gift of fear of the Lord, seek never to displease or deny him in this world, but to acknowledge him before others, including when threatened. I want to spend our time on the minority interpretation because the devil is getting a lot of attention today. Many Catholics are asking questions, and some are indeed becoming anxious. 2 movies have recently been released focusing on the devil. The Pope's Exorcist, which is really a shallow and disappointing horror movie starring actor Russell Crowe, supposedly based on the life of the former exorcist of Rome, Father Gabriele Amorth, and the critically acclaimed movie Nefarious, which focuses realistically on the demonic possession of a fictional death row inmate in his conversations with a social psychologist. Even if the major interpretation of the passage is about a reverential fear of God, Jesus throughout the gospel certainly wants to help us have a healthy awareness that the devil exists and seeks to kill us. That we should, therefore, as we proclaim in our baptismal promises, reject him, his evil works, and his empty promises. St. Peter, the feast of whose martyrdom we'll celebrate on Thursday, compares the devil to a type of wild beast. He says, your adversary, the devil, is prowling the world like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. That someone he longs to consume is you and me. What then does a healthy fear of the evil one, which Jesus wants us to have, look like? It involves 2 elements. First, we need to know how the devil seeks to attack us. The devil has no power over us unless we give him that power. He can't harm our soul unless we become his accomplices and allow our souls to be killed through mortal/deadly sin, which separates our souls from the source of life, who is God. The way the one Jesus calls the father of lies seeks to accomplish this assisted suicide is by getting us to succumb to one of the diabolical deceptions, just as the devil did with Adam and Eve in the garden. A healthy fear of the devil involves no paranoia, but a sane vigilance against the devil's lies and against all his temptations to induce us to sin. Second, once we know that and how the devil's out to get us, we have to know what the remedy is to defeat his attempt to conquer us. That remedy is a deep trust in God that expresses itself in saying yes to him in everything. The evil one got Adam and Eve to sin first by getting them to distrust God and his promises, then to do what God had explicitly told them not to do. Therefore, the antidote to the devil's machinations is to accentuate the opposite of what the devil wants to achieve. If our best defense is a good offense, we need to trust in God and seek to do his will in everything. If we trust in God the Father enough to say yes to him and no to the devil, if we base our lives on the truth incarnate rather than on the father of lies, then we don't need to fear the devil any more than Jesus did. Jesus is the stronger man whom he tells us in St. Luke's Gospel has attacked and overpowered the devil, taking away his armor and dividing his spoils. If we stick fully with that stronger man, if we love him with all our mind, heart, soul, and strength, then we have nothing to fear. That's why Jesus' statements in the Gospel this Sunday are a paradox and not a contradiction. It's only when we're not totally God's that we have to fear, as Jesus tells us, because the devil is constantly at the gate waiting for us to echo his no to God so that he might seduce us away from God in this world and in the next. The devil's global strategy with us is to have us oppose God's plans for us. This involves first opposing God's plans for us to become holy. The only way for us to share eternally in Jesus' victory is to become a saint, because only saints get to heaven. To keep us from heaven, the devil wants to keep us from becoming godlike. With some of us, he tries to accomplish this by convincing us that we don't really have to be holy. We just need to be good to get a D+ rather than an A+ on our imitation of Christ. With others, the devil tries to make us fear the consequences of sanctity, that if we strive for holiness, we'll lose our friends, jobs, freedom, personality, identity, perhaps even our life. That's all a crock. The second thing the devil opposes is our call to be ardent apostles, to bring others to holiness, to love our neighbor as Christ loves us. Loving others necessarily involves sharing the gospel with them. Jesus tells us this Sunday, what I say to you in the dark, tell in the light. What you hear whispered, proclaim from the housetops. The devil gets us not to act on this call to acknowledge Christ before others in two ways. He convinces us that it's not really our mission to announce the gospel, but rather priests or nuns or catechists or somebody or anyone else. His second subterfuge is to frighten us away from proclaiming the gospel by making us fear that we don't know the faith well enough to pass it on, or by thinking that our friends and family will consider us hypocrites if we start to proclaim the gospel now, or by getting us to fear that if we bring the gospel to the public square, we will suffer for it. This fear, of course, is justified. If we preach the gospel, we may suffer for it, as some before us have. But that's why Jesus tells us not to fear those who can only kill the body. He wants us not to fear those who seek to intimidate us in this way, including the devil, but rather to have the courage to recognize he is with us, and that the Father who loves us will deliver us from the evil one if only we ask for his help. To defeat the devil and grow in courage to live as holy missionary disciples, the greatest help we have is the Holy Eucharist, in which we receive Jesus, the conqueror of sin and death, the vanquisher of the devil, the strongest man of all. Jesus in the Eucharist is the greatest source of holiness and the greatest impetus to live and spread the faith. The devil, therefore, hates the Eucharist and tries to do whatever he can to keep us from Jesus. He tries first to keep us from Mass and Eucharistic adoration and to disbelieve in Jesus' real presence. And he has successfully persuaded 5 of 6 Catholics in the U.S. to prioritize something other than Jesus on Sunday, and 7 of 10 to think that the Eucharist is just a thing rather than the Son of God who defeated him. If the devil can't stop us from attending Mass and believing in the Eucharistic Lord, then he tries to get us to receive the Lord in a routine way or sinful state. The best way, therefore, to be equipped to withstand the devil's onslaught is to receive the Lord with ever greater frequency and fervor, and respond to his work within us with ever greater zeal and fidelity. That's what the Church in the U.S. is seeking to do during this 3-year-plus Eucharistic revival, the parish phase of which we entered into 2 weeks ago. Every time we receive Jesus well in the Eucharist, we share in his victory over the devil and are strengthened with courage to carry that victory out to others. So as we get ready for Mass this Sunday, let us take to heart what Jesus tells us. Be not afraid, and receive with love, gratitude, and faith the one who has definitively defeated the devil and has shown us the way to share in his victory forever. God bless you all.
Thank you, Father Landry. To hear more from Father Landry, check out his website at catholicpreaching.com, and you can also catch his writings at EWTN's own National Catholic Register. A big thank you to all our listeners for joining us. I hope that this show was helpful. I hope that it gave you more peace and more hope and more joy, and you go with our prayers.